I was demonstrating what I call a high-flying physical yoga pose. I was showing one of those impressive Instagram yoga things that I was doing, and I said, "Isn't that cool?" And she said, "Yeah, that's okay, but who cares? You're happier, you're calmer, and you're easier to be around." And when your own mother looks you in the eye and says the yoga has made you a better person, you realize it's not just about touching your toes anymore.
Hello, beautiful soul sparklers. I'm Darci Legg, and welcome to Darci's Mindful Magic. This segment is called Yoga Yes, a show where people lovingly share how they integrate yoga into the lives of children, making each day better. I am so thrilled to have Shane Knox with me today, sharing his wisdom. Welcome, Shane.
Hello, Darci. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm super, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have you. So I'm going to give you a little taste of Shane Knox, an introduction of him. So he considers himself an urban shaman. He's the author of a wonderful book called Spirit Message 222 Channeled Inspirations. He's a spiritual teacher, an intuitive advisor, a Reiki master, and the owner of Sage Studio Yoga and Wellness in the Springfield, Missouri area, ERYT 500. And can you explain to us what that is, please?
Well, ERYT 500 is actually the designation that I have as a yoga teacher.
Oh.
And so ERYT 500, the national standard is through the Yoga Alliance.
Okay.
And when I went through my training, I had the luxury, because of my other work as a shaman, to be able to go straight through. So normally people do a 200-hour training segment, and they follow it up with a 300-hour training segment, which totals that 500. So the first designation that a person receives is RYT 200, which means registered yoga teacher, saying that we have met the standards and the practices of the Yoga Alliance, the nationally recognized standard. And after that, if you go on and do the 300-hour training, you become RYT 500. And then because I have taught over 10,000 hours of yoga and I have been at it for many, many years now, I have qualified myself for the designation of ERYT, which means experienced registered yoga teacher at the 500-hour level. And so I am presently at the top ranking designation that is given by the Yoga Alliance and recognized nationally.
Nice. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. That's awesome.
And it's the thing that I love about it is that there is a standard. Yoga has often been viewed as some, very alternative or deeply mystical thing. And there is a very spiritual side to yoga if one chooses to address it that way. There are actually two different paths of yoga. One is called Hatha yoga, which most people are familiar with, which translated means sun moon yoga, but it really is the physical body working with the muscles and the nervous system, trying to take people into that more relaxed, centered, focused state of being while toning the body, the mind, and the spirit all at the same time. Then if you go into what's called Raja Yoga, which was known as the royal path, that is where we study what's called an eight-limbed practice that has to do with ethics and the way that we approach the world and some deeper teachings in that way. And both are recognized as very viable ones. I think that for the average lay person, to put it that way, or we're talking about kids and things like that right now, I think that we're talking about Hatha yoga a lot. And there is so much incredibly documented, researched, viable, real information out there about what yoga does with people that there's quite a movement that's happening right now to incorporate it into various different places in our society.
That's exactly what we want to talk about today. So you got me right on the right start. I was going to tell everybody that I have been receiving readings from you, consultations from you for the last 10 years. And that is the one thing that you actually do. You'll ask me the first question. This is really brag-worthy worth. So to do a consultation, I usually have a list written out, and he'll ask for the first question on the list, and then I'll read it to him. And then after that, he just goes on to the next question and answers that without me reading it. So he is amazing. Not only is he excellent at yoga, he is amazing as an intuitive counselor. So let's get on to our first question if you're ready.
Sure.
Okay.
Let me have it.
Can you share with us a story from your childhood that illustrates what it's like to grow up empathic?
Oh, yes. I know that probably the biggest story, and I think the one that was the most impacting in my world, a time where I sought out actual clinical psychological help because I was dealing with, I thought, what was a form of depression that was going on in my world. And I was having a very difficult time. I was in a dark place. I think depression has many different forms, but just to take it to a simple place, I was unable to get feeling okay or to a happy, settled place. And so I went through a lot of counseling and a lot of different things in that nature. And I remember one day, and it sounds very superficial, but you have to get how impacting this moment was. I was standing outside of the local shopping mall, actually, and I had this thought that was going through my mind of how aggravated I was with my sister. How just absolutely, I just had a real problem and I was just aggravated as I could be. And I started laughing in that moment because I don't have a sister.
Oh,
And right in that moment that I'm going through this entire thought process, I'm like, okay, I'm really upset with my sister, except that I don't have one. These two girls walk by that are obviously in conflict, and you can tell that they were siblings just by looking at them. And so I had picked up on the emotion that they had. And in that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, I think that there is something different than depression going on. And I started seeking out through people very much like what I do now for a living. And they actually helped me to understand that I was having trouble with emotions because not all of the emotions were mine. And so through that process and that aha, very random, but I don't believe in random kind of a moment where I saw those two and it triggered in that way, it was an incredible thing. Now, if I go back a little bit farther than that, my mother, if you were to be interviewing her right now, would tell you story after story about when she was going through the divorce or difficult things with my father or things like that, how I would come up and I would put my hand on her and I would talk about, you're sad, or are you okay? And of course, as any good mother would, she wasn't displaying that. She was trying to actually shield us from that side of things. She was trying to cry in her bedroom on her own.
yeah.
And I was going up to her, are you okay? What's wrong? And wanting to put my hands on her. And I've come to realize later that that's because it not only heightens the sense of connection, it's a way to redirect some of that energy back towards a person to try and lift them out of where they were. So one of the things that I joke about all the time is that I don't believe in the supernatural. I believe it's all just natural. And I think that growing up in a childhood where I had a mother, at least one parent, that was very supportive and open and willing to believe that there was something else there, and actually helped me to progress out of the clinical world into, that's where I started yoga and meditation and all of that as a way to deal with that depression that I was going through, which was really just a byproduct of the empathy that I actually possessed.
So yoga actually helped you stop taking on everybody, being more empathic, helped you be less sensitive and take on other people's.
And allowed me to transition. And of course, this is uniquely my story. Allowed me to transition off of the meds that they had me on for depression and allowed me to begin to manage my own mental health in that moment. And it was a combination of the yoga, the meditation, and the belief system that I have. And that I've never had to return to the traditional therapies. I've worked with clients throughout the years where we have a combination of some people to get free of the traditional therapies, some people that work in conjunction with what I do in tandem with their therapists. You mentioned Sage Studio. I'm very proud to say that in the office right next to mine, we have a clinical psychologist and we refer clients back and forth to each other. We consult on cases and we work together on stuff because there is an amazing place where those two worlds connect right in the middle.
Yes.
And the tools such as yoga, I had done some yoga as a kid because my mom would go to yoga class and she'd show me something, and I thought I was doing yoga. And then when I got into actually studying it because of the depression and getting into it as a legitimate, dedicated practice, it transformed me. The one thing I know I'm rambling on, but the one thing that my mother once said to me that is so impacting, you'll hear me reference mom quite a bit because she's been my biggest spiritual teacher. I was demonstrating what I call a high-flying physical yoga pose. I was showing one of those impressive Instagram yoga things that I was doing.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Isn't that cool?" And she said, "Yeah, that's okay, but who cares? You're happier, you're calmer, and you're easier to be around."
Yes. Yes.
And when your own mother looks you in the eye and says the yoga has made you a better person, you realize it's not just about touching your toes anymore.
It's so true. The first time I've ever done yoga, they had a lady come in and teach us when I was a teacher after school on Thursday nights. And I worked out 5 nights a week anyway, so it wasn't new to work out, but back then I did. But at the very end, she would do a 15-minute meditation. And I had never done a meditation religiously back then. I felt so good after that meditation that normally Fridays were all crazy and stressful, but that Friday I was just in this amazing state of flow. So I continue to go back just for meditation. I mean, I love the exercise and everything, but to me, the best part was just the meditation at the very end.
Well, see, and if you actually study yoga as deeply as I have, you realize that in its inception, it wasn't about the physical practice as much. The reason that it's evolved into such a physical practice is twofold. One is that it's become more westernized, and that is the way we think about things. We think about fitness classes, and we look at all of this before we look at all of this and everything else. But the other reason is because in antiquity, back when yoga was developed, people were plowing fields with oxen. They were gathering their food. They were building mud huts to live in. They were working. The physicality didn't need to be addressed because life itself demanded such a physicality.
Yeah.
So yoga was about, there's a phrase called yoga chitra, which means ceasing the fluctuations of the mind, taking the mind into a calm, centered place. If you'll indulge me for one brief moment, one of the other things that I used to teach is broadcasting. And in broadcasting, in the radio station, in the studio, they have a thing that's called a clipper limiter. And a clipper limiter is an electronic device that if the voice waves are this big, it cuts off the very top and it cuts off the very bottom. So all you get is the beautiful, rich tone of the voice that's there. And so yoga in its own sense is a human clipper limiter. It cuts off those ridiculous manic highs and it cuts off those terrible depressive lows, and it allows you to live in that sweet spot in the middle of all of it. Now, there's plenty of fluctuation. We feel the gamut of emotions and we process through things just like everybody else does, but it allows us to be in a much more in control state with it. We were talking about the depression, or I've seen it work with anger or behavior disorders, things like this. It takes you into the control of the mind and also works directly, a lot of studies on this, with the parasympathetic nervous system, so that there actually is a triggered relaxation response that goes in there because of the way that the nerves are activated through the different poses, the breath, and the movements. And so it actually is a much more complex thing than a lot of people think of. And there's a very legitimate reason why it has all of the effects that it does. Now, when you talk about, you mentioned kids, and I want to just hijack this for a second because it's one of the coolest things. I'm not even letting you have your own show here.
That's fine.
I actually did a kids yoga class at one point. And working with these kids, the approach that we had was that we had the parents there, partly because they were minors, obviously. These were small kids. These were early grade school age kids.
Uh-huh.
And we had the parents there as the props.
Oh,
So if the child was doing a tree pose, mom or dad was standing behind them, helping to steady them. And so it built quite a bond of, I can count on my parents to be there to support me and to hold me up. But it
yeah.
also led to an understanding or a development of what I would call compliance, where the authority person was saying, here's what I want you to do. And the child would then do that, developing those neural pathways of being able to respond to somebody that was, had their best interest in heart, but was
Yeah.
also the authority figure in the moment. And what I heard back from the parents was not only that it was so enjoyable and, the kids would get home and want to do more yoga and all that because it feels good, but
Uh-huh.
that they developed a deeper, better relationship with their children because
Wow.
of that dynamic of being the support and the help, the guide and the director. And then, of course, the sweetness of it that I have to share is that relaxation that you were talking about at the end of your class that you went to.
Hmm.
I would set it up. It's called Shavasana, which is the yoga word for relaxation.
Okay.
We would have the children set up the parents. They would give them a bolster for their knees, and they would put a blanket over them, and that they would get mom or dad in their nice little, burrito cocoon of goodness there. And
Yeah.
then the kid would lay down beside them for that relaxation meditation. And
Hmm.
every single one, I had a class of about 10. And so that'd be 20 people in the room.
Uh-huh.
Every single one of them, when the kid laid down, you'd see that little hand reach over there,
Oh.
and they would hold their mother or father's hand through the entire relaxation. I never told them to do that.
Oh.
I never had to tell them to do that. And it
Yeah.
created this amazing bonding, connecting moment that was there.
That is so sweet. I love it. It's just awesome.
It was incredible to watch because you could see the overall loving effect, the connection, the deepening, the all of that. In that moment, I guarantee you that the child nor the mother had any concern about anything else that was going on in the world. They were
Yeah.
in their okay space, at least for that moment.
Oh, yeah. That is just amazing. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is, I could go on and on about this stuff because I love this stuff so much. I love it because it works.
It does. And and like you said, it's drug free. I have nothing against drugs, but it's if you
No.
could try something that's drug free, I am all for it before you try drugs, of course.
Well, I guarantee you that the body responds very well to endorphins, the built-in dopamine, serotonins, all of that, which are released through the yoga practice.
Hmm.
And the stimulation of the nervous system, it teaches us to respond to what's going on rather than reacting to it.
Yeah, definitely. So you've already discussed the two different types of yoga
Mhm.
that there are. There are so many misconceptions about yoga out there, especially in the Bible Belt where you are. So
Oh,
can you
yes.
explain to our viewers what exactly yoga is and what it is not?
Yes, I would love to. I'll start with a very brief. You know me, you've known me for a long time. Everything has a story.
Uh-huh.
I remember I was standing in line at a Starbucks one day, and I had my studio shirt on that had the Om symbol and Sage Studio Yoga and all of that. And the girl behind the counter, lady behind the counter, looks at me and said, I've always wanted to do yoga.
Oh.
I said, well, great. Here's a free class card. Come and practice with us. It'll be great. And she said,
Uh-huh.
oh, God, I could never do it, though. And I said, why not? And she said, because you get in these weird positions and you chant so that demons can possess you and all this. And my
Oh,
first thought was, if that's your conception, why do you want to do it?
yeah.
And second of all, that has nothing to do with what we're doing. Now, I believe where that misconception comes from is when I talked about the Hatha and the Raja paths that were there.
Uh-huh.
The Raja path, the eight limbed, there is a part of it. It's taken from Sanskrit. So when you hear me talking these odd words that aren't recognizable, they come
Hmm.
from the original Sanskrit that it was written in. There's a thing called Ishvara Pranidhana, and Ishvara Pranidhana is the acceptance that there is a higher power, the awareness that there is what we would call God. And the thing that I love about it, and I relate it often to AA meetings, it's the God of your understanding. They're not telling you what God is supposed to mean to you. And that's where it runs into a little bit of a roadblock. In a very Christianized area or a very fundamentally Christianized area, when you say God of your understanding instead of saying specifically Christian God, people think you're talking about all sorts of wild and crazy things. And that's just not really true. It's the acknowledgement that there is a higher power that we're connected to. What that higher power is to you and what that relationship is, that's uniquely yours. You can be a Christian yogi, you could be a Muslim yogi, you could be a Buddhist yogi, you could be an atheist yogi, so long as you realize that there is something bigger than you. You know, nature's bigger than me.
Yeah.
And so when you get into that, there become a lot of misconceptions. And because traditionally the yoga poses were named because it originated out of ancient India. And it was formed by people who, many of which were Hindu. But it's not a practice of Hinduism. It's completely separate. They're not interchangeable terms. And so yoga is much more of a philosophy and an approach to life and the tools of how we interact with the divine. So if a person were a devout Catholic and they took up the yoga practice, it would make them a better Catholic. If somebody was Baptist and they took up the yoga practice, it would make them a better Baptist. And so when you get into the understanding of it in that regard, you see that it's a universal practice that can fit anybody and can be very complementary to any belief system. Now, unfortunately, not the religion, but certain people, as we know, like to control things in the name of religion. And it's been demonized by a lot of churches and a lot of people that have certain opinions and a lot of misunderstanding. I had one person look at me very seriously and she said, I don't know how you sit there for an entire hour and just say Om over and over again. And I said, well, that's good because we don't. There's a reason you can't conceptualize that because that's not what we do.
Yeah.
And so when we get into what is yoga,
Uh-huh.
yoga is something that you can take this much of, or you can study this much of, and you can apply it directly into your life. Every single class that I teach ends the same way. We start the class with an intention. We talk about one of the yoga philosophies or whatever spiritual concept I'm focused on for the day, everyday life situations that we're talking about. Then we do our practice while holding that as we're going to resolve or get to a wonderful place with whatever the topic is. And then at the end of it, I give a little talk. And the last thing I say every single class is, now choose to take that with you off of this mat and into your life. Because if yoga doesn't impact your life, it's not real yoga. And if your life doesn't impact your yoga practice, then you're missing the amazing connection that should be there. If you have a rough day at the office, you have a coworker that there's a conflict with, for an example, your tree pose is probably going to sway in the breeze a little bit. It's going to be a windy day for that tree, and you're going to be like this. On that day where everything is feeling centered and calm and beautiful, and you feel rooted and grounded, mighty oak. And I guarantee you, depending upon what else has happened in my life, using that tree pose as our example, some days I'm the mighty oak, and some days I'm the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. And it just depends on where my emotional state is. But taking that into my yoga practice, my mat becomes my place of therapy, my place of resolution. And so I work it all out. One of our other phrases is leave it all on the mat. And so whatever problems I come in with that day, I sweat and I breathe and I move and I hold focus and I believe that I'm connecting with myself, which is the first way that I can connect with whatever I consider this higher power to be. And then I resolve that, and then I choose to take that state of bliss and calmness and rootedness off of my mat back into my life.
Nice.
And so when we treat yoga as a tool, almost as the most amazing magical reset button that ever existed, if we treat it in that way, then it becomes a tool that we can use no matter what the circumstance is. Because let's be honest, we're talking about depression and negative thoughts. I think that people suffer a lot of times from overly charged happy thoughts. either not being able to let go of them and settle back into regular everyday life, building something into a much bigger thing than it actually is in reality. And yoga allows us to come down from that manic high as well,
Oh.
because it roots and it grounds and it takes us into that place. So in many ways, it's the great equalizer that we build into our life. And I think that on its face, what a lot of people think of yoga is absolutely true. You will tone your muscles, you will gain flexibility, you'll increase your strength and your balance, depending upon what type of practice you take. You'll get a greater range of motion. And on that, I've always said that I want to be able to move under my own power when I'm 90. So I think the physical part is very, very important. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
If you allow it to, and I see it happen in classes, if you allow it to, it changes you on an internal way. And what I love, an example, I had a lady come up after class. She practiced with me about 6 months or so. She came up and she said, I have to tell you a story. I'm part of a 12-step recovery group, and they always ask me to share a story, and I'm always so overcome with anxiety and nerves that I just can't do it. They asked me to give a speech this time, and she said, I sat there, I put my hands together like we do at the beginning of class, I took a deep breath just like we work on in class, and I went and gave this talk like I had done it my whole life.
Wow.
And it allowed her a trigger, a tool to get over that anxiety and to be able to go and do that. Well, if we can take people out of the anxiety of, I've got my midterm test coming up, and we can take them out of anxiety into their thinking brain, all of our test scores go up. If we can take people out of, I feel a conflict with this other student or this other person, and we allow them to realize that maybe there's an inner conflict that they need to resolve. Now we have reduced the rate of violence and negativity within the school or the office place or wherever it may be.
Definitely needs to be integrated into school. When I was a first grade teacher, I had my 5th year into it. I had this class that was like nothing you could ever, in my wildest dreams, I never imagined having a class this difficult. So I would try everything with this class. I mean, and the only thing that worked, the only 2 things that would work with them to get them calmed down to where they could actually learn and be halfway respectable was yoga, which I didn't call it yoga.
Oh no.
I didn't call it yoga, but I was actually doing yoga with them. And then we did meditations, which I called breathing with them.
Yes.
So those were the only 2 things that I could get that class. And that class, they didn't turn into perfect little angels after the fact. However, they were able to calm themselves down, center themselves. They felt better. They treated others better. And it was enough to where we could actually work. So
there's a wonderful national yoga teacher named Sean Korn that I saw in an interview one day. And this sums it up. And I relate to this very much because I suffer from insomnia at times. And they were interviewing her and they said, give me an example of what yoga's done for you. And she says, well, I've suffered from insomnia my whole life. And the interviewer interrupts her and says, oh, and yoga fixed your insomnia. And she said, no, not at all. I still have insomnia. I'm just not mad about it anymore.
Oh.
And when we think about that, I think that's wonderful. There's one of the old school teachers, BKSA Iyengar, who is considered a grandfather of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
He has a statement, I'm paraphrasing here, but to the effect of, yoga helps us to cure which need not be endured, and to be able to endure that which we cannot cure.
Awesome.
And I think that really puts things in perspective in an incredible, incredible way. When you talked about the school system, I told you I taught the little kids at one point. One of the other great things that I thought was amazing was I actually set up a program in the little town. I live just outside of Springfield, in a little town called Republic. And I set up with the Republic school teachers that I would go in at, I think it was 4 o'clock or 4:30 after all the kids were gone and they'd gotten their stuff done for the day. And I went in and I offered what I call karma yoga, just to be in service, yoga class for them. And we did just 30 minutes. It was not high flying. It wasn't Instagram gymnastics yoga. It was some very straightforward stuff, very focused on breathing, very focused on mindfulness, with some basic movements to try and free up the body, because we all store our traumas in our body in different places. And the effect that it had on the teachers, I knew it was affecting the students because the teachers were in such better place.
Yeah.
And you would see them in the middle of class. I would talk about some yoga philosophy, or we do a breath practice or something like that. And every now and then you'd hear, I'm stealing that. I'm using that in my class. I'm going to try that with the kids tomorrow. And it was always this wonderful, wonderful feedback. Now, of course, considering it's a very small town, one of the things that we ran into is what you were talking about. The teachers themselves had the awareness they could not go into the classroom and talk about yoga as yoga, because then we were back to the demons possessing you and whatever other craziness. But they would talk about stretching, they would talk about breathing, and they would talk about the individual elements that make up a yoga practice and label it in that way. And I don't care what you call it. That's the least important part. The effect and the making people better. The word yoga itself means to yoke. So that means what you are tying yourself to or what you are bonding yourself to. So first we bond ourselves to the fact that we are more than just a physical being. And through that, we develop a deeper connection with our own self, our own mind, our own emotions. We take emotions out of being a driving force and turn it into simple communication. One part of myself is communicating with another part of myself. And as we develop that deeper union, connection, yoking within our own self, then we begin to relate to other people and circumstances in our life in a different way. And through that, we begin to experience our life in a different way. And it's a very elevated way of experiencing.
It sure is. It really is. So we discussed so many amazing benefits of using yoga for adults and children alike. Is there any unknown benefits that we have not discussed yet?
One of the things that I have found, you alluded to and talked about my work as a shaman, intuitive consultations that I do, Reiki practice. For anybody that's unfamiliar with that, that's energetic work for the sake of relaxation, creating an atmosphere in which healing can occur, that sort of a thing. I would say that yoga is the single biggest contributor to my level of expertise, that it increased my efficiency and my prowess in every single thing that I do. It made me a better shaman. Wow. And it's an interesting thing because it's called, of course, there's a yoga word for it, the siddhis, the gifts that we have, the gifts of perception, of awareness, of healing, of nurturing. Because I like to go through all of the different religions and beliefs, the 7 gifts that the Holy Spirit gives mankind, if we want to look at things biblically. And so it gives us these gifts that we're able to live our life and experience things in a much deeper capacity. And even though it sounds a little airy-fairy, a little silly the way that I put it, the days are prettier and the flowers smell better, and the people that I connect with, I really connect with. And then I think the other thing that it does, the thing that nobody thinks about with this, and I would liken it somewhat to martial arts when I say this, it gives you a great sense of confidence. Not confidence as in a conflict, I can take care of myself. I don't mean that. But a confidence in that I know myself. So I'm not going to overextend myself. I'm not going to put myself in a place that isn't right for me. I'm going to keep myself that clipper limiter. I'm going to keep my life in that zone as well, so that I can be an authority in my own world. And that allows you a sense of confidence. It teaches us to accept ourselves. It teaches us that tree pose I was talking about, when you're flapping in the breeze there, it teaches you that, okay, not every day is the same. We don't always feel exactly the same. We have good days, we have bad days, we have strong moments, we have weak moments, and that they're all okay because they're all part of our human experience.
Love it.
And so it gives us this gift of personal acceptance and a confidence. And I would even go so far as knowing who we are to a different degree than we ever did before.
Like you're diving deep. And we could all use more confidence. I mean, I don't care who
Oh,
you are.
in everything.
Yes.
Yeah. I consider myself a very confident person because it's something I constantly work on.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realize my insecurities, I realize my self-doubt. And I think the fact that I can see those parts, not judge them, but see them, that allows me a confidence, that allows me a strength. And I think that when we get to the point where mind, body, spirit, and emotions, when we get those 4 legs of our table really solid underneath us, then I think we can build a really beautiful, incredible life.
Yeah.
And again, if yoga doesn't make your life better, you need to dig deeper into your yoga, because if it's not affecting your life, you're not doing it right.
That's true. That is so true.
I have clients, students that will come in and they'll go, "Is my yoga getting better?" And I always look at them, I go, "Are you happier?" "Well, yeah, but what about my yoga?" I was like, if you're happier, then your yoga's working.
Yeah. I would never imagine them asking you if it's getting better, but I guess since you're the instructor, you would be able to tell. But
Well, and they're thinking about their pose. Does my crow
yeah.
pose look better? How's my warrior one? And I look at them and I go, "No, how's your life?"
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, I'm actually happier. I'm not fighting with my spouse nearly as much. I got that promotion on the job. They said I'm really good at what I do." Now your yoga's working.
There you go. So are there any tips that you could give teachers to implement it into the classroom? I know we've already talked a little bit about it.
I think that one of the biggest things is what you'd already alluded to, and I did as well. Make it fun.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest problems that we have is when we're trying to resolve problems, we get so heavy and serious about it. How about we approach it with some lightness? It should never be I'm going to take control of these kids and I'm going to force them into a better place through yoga. That's not yoga.
Mm-mm.
Let me show you that you can feel good. And so I would start with a very small thing, and I would recommend breath practice more than anything. And to everybody that's watching, I challenge you to pay attention to yourself over the next 24 hours and see how many times you realize that you're holding your breath. How many times that you are either breathing very shallow or that you're really just not breathing at all. And when we get into a stressful moment of any sort, what's the first thing we do?
Yeah.
And we're holding our breath.
Mm-hmm.
So we're depleting the oxygen flow to the brain. We're depleting the oxygen flow through the entire body. And we're putting ourselves into the fight or flight panic mode. Then if we find, and this is basic biology, every biology teacher in the world should actually teach us at some point. If your exhale is decidedly longer than your inhale, it triggers a sense of relaxation. So I have all these people that are trying to figure out what fancy breath practice they need to do. There are a lot of them. Oh, there are all sorts of breath practices. Trust me, there are a lot of them. The one you start with is what I call the 2-to-1 breath. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Most people, that means we have to shorten the inhale a little bit because we run out of air before we count through that exhale. But if that exhale is decidedly longer, and just think about this. Now you've got, I'm looking at a classroom of kids. I'm the teacher here that I'm deciding I want to introduce this. And let's use my example from before. It's test time. And we want our kids to do absolutely the best on their test that they possibly can do. We want to see what they actually know, not what the nervous, anxious mind knows, not what is inhibited recall because of their emotional state of being. And so now we take them in and we have them all sit down, and let's all count to ourselves as we breathe. We have an entire room breathing as one entity. We have the entire room stepping into a collective consciousness breath that's there. And because of the physiology of it, they're downshifting from that adrenalized state of anxiety, nerves, fear, whatever it is, into that centered, calm place. And they're also oxygenating their brain so that they are clearer, their synapses are firing better, their recall is stronger, and they're able to go in, and that test is amazing, and the entire class does absolutely wonderful. Or when we have a challenge. I hate to reference such a thing, but it's the world we live in. We have active shooter drills in schools. We have kids that are going back under a pandemic right now. We have, there are a lot of stressors that exist for teachers. I would like to take a moment, because I have some really wonderful teacher friends. I think that it is one of the most noble professions, and I think that it is getting to the point where you guys are asked so much. You have to deliver so much more than what the scope of your job should be, and to be able to minimize those conflicts and to calm those emotions. Or let's take it to an entirely different place. Let's say that we're dealing with, every class you have varied demographics. You have kids that come from wealthier homes, you have kids that come from poorer homes, and you're trying to get everybody to this, we're all equal, we're on the same playing field. That's one of the jobs of a teacher, is to let every one of those students believe that they have the same opportunity as those others. We take them all into a similar practice. That's a great equalizer. We're treating everybody the same. We're showing them that we all need to take that breath, take that moment, find our inner self. And then that development of confidence that we're talking about, think about, I can't imagine being a teacher and being any more proud of seeing one of my students finding a sense of confidence or finding a sense of self-worth or acceptance. A minute ago I'm talking about test scores. Who cares? How are those kids feeling about themselves?
Yeah.
And I think that just going in with a simple breath practice that doesn't need fancy terminology, doesn't need any special props or circumstances are there, could literally be done in the lunchroom, the classroom, or the playground, and isn't just good for the students, it's good for the teacher too.
Yeah, it really is. So when I taught first grade, I would teach breath work. And I remember, I would have like 28, 30 students in my classroom. And, I remember one time a lot was going on. I think they were doing centers where they were off doing their own things. And it was loud. And in the middle of the rug, there's this little boy sitting cross-legged with his hands like this. And I didn't teach him to put his hands like this, right on his knees with his eyes closed. And he's just breathing. And I thought, my work is done. He could calm himself down. It just made me so happy.
Well, see, you just hit on one of the giant keys, because what we're doing is we're empowering the students or the adults to self-regulate.
Yes. Yeah.
To self-soothe.
Yeah.
And when we get into that, I mentioned the fight or flight. Several of the poses themselves and the breath practices in combination actually trigger an awareness through the central nervous system, and they shift us into, or out of rather, that fight or flight mode. It shifts us into that calmer state of being, that more rational state of being. And if you really take the time and do any research whatsoever, probably my happiest thing I can say about yoga is that we've come out of the closet, and we've come out of the woo, and we've come out of the spooky thing and all of that. It's everywhere, and it's growing in its popularity because it works.
Yes, finally, right?
Yeah, it's being recognized. They're doing tests. Actually, now I want you to think about this. We're talking about classrooms and stuff like that. There is not a single, not one professional sports team, college sports team, or Olympic athlete that doesn't have a yoga teacher on their team now.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
When you watch the Olympics, those guys getting ready to do the big ski jumps or the dives or the whatever, you'll see them warming up doing yoga practices, because not only does it tone and loosen the body, it gets them in the mental state to be able to give their very best performance right then.
Perfect. Yes, completely makes sense. I could talk to you for hours, but I need to
I love you, and I love talking to you, but yeah.
I need to close out. Do you have a saying, a poem, or a meditation that you want to close with?
I tell you, one of the things that I have said my whole life, and I think that it's very important, it is far better that you happen to life than to just let life happen to you. And I think that yoga gives us a sense of we can now impact the world around us instead of the world just having its way with us.
Yeah.
And I think if there was any one thing that I wanted people to know, It's that you have the ability to step out of reaction and into chosen response. And the moment that you do that, the minute you quit trying to control what's going on out there and you start controlling what's going on in here, out there has no choice but to follow suit.
Yeah. It's so amazing.
Everything just gets better.
It really does. It gets so much better. And not even knowing that you could have that kind of power and that kind of control until someone tells you, hey,
Yeah.
by the way, this is what it'll work for you. So, yes, thank you so much for offering us your wisdom to yoga and to support children. So, if someone's interested in reaching out to you, what's the best way that they could do that?
If you would like to get a hold of me directly and see a little bit more about my work, you can go to shaynox.me. There's a website, and I've got a bio and all sorts of descriptions about the work that I do. And that actually has a link to mysagestudio.com, which is the website for the Wellness Center and the yoga that we have here.
Perfect. And I will put that in the description down below.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you for that.
And Darci,
Yes.
you are awesome for doing this. You are giving people an opportunity and a voice to share the things that they're passionate about. And I know that you have been so gracious in extending your thanks to me. I want to send it right back to you because I think what you're doing here is amazing. I think that you're making a difference.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. Wonderful. And so to close out, for the rest of you watching, thank you for your attention. If you have a sensitive, empathic child who loves yoga, let us know down below what their favorite part is and how it affects your precious one. I would love to hear all about it. Till next time, keep on sparkling.
Well, sadly, this is what you get with me. So there you are.
Well, you're lucky to be a guy. You don't have to do all the everything. Yeah, that's what I like about wearing masks. I only have to do my eyes. I love
That is the best thing I've heard all day.